Good evening, everyone, and assalamu alaikum. May the peace and blessings of the Most High be with all of us this evening. We are joined here this evening with four phenomenal panelists to really put into context what we are here to discuss, which is the killing of George Floyd, the aftermath and reflection with Colorado African American leaders. And so I am joined here this evening by Tamara Banks, by Imam Ibrahim Ali, Adrian Miller, Dr. Nabi Hassan, and Tay Anderson. And before we kind of start here, I really wanted to talk a little bit about Multicultural Mosaic Foundation, which is the host of tonight's conversation. Multicultural Mosaic Foundation was founded in 2003, and they really believe that as a community, diversity is our strength. We have a great deal to learn from one another, which can enrich ourselves without undermining our own identities. Together, listening and responding with openness and respect, we can move forward in ways that acknowledge genuine differences, but build on shared hopes and values. And so with that being said, the statement that was issued on George Floyd from the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation, I think it's important to kind of share that because this was the background as to why this event came to be. The death of George Floyd, who died while in police custody on Monday, is heartbreaking for the African American community, our nation, and the entire world. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. This incident is further proof that racism and implicit bias continue to plague our nation. The Multicultural Mosaic Foundation condemns the actions by those individuals that led to the death of George Floyd. We must commit ourselves to education, dialogue, compassion, understanding, and peaceful coexistence as we work to end the inherent hatred that is born from ignorance, misunderstanding, and fear. We must use this moment to come together for the cause of freedom and justice so that no person will live in fear because of the color of their skin, their ethnic background, their race, their views, who they love, or who they pray to. We call on all to have courage in the face of fear, to come together in the spirit of love, brotherhood, and sisterhood as we stand against racism, bigotry, and hatred. Together, we must reaffirm our dedication to freedom and justice for all. Powerful statement that really sets the mood for why we are really here today. I mean, today is really a conversation about the murder of George Floyd, but it's even larger than that as we reflect on Breonna Taylor life who was taken, as well as Ahmaud Arbery. And to really begin this conversation, I want to really invite the panelists that we have here today to really begin this with sharing what are their immediate reflections given all that's been happening. And we do recognize that what is going on in the Black American community is something that cannot be comprehended by anybody other than the Black American community. And so I recognize that as a non-Black person of color. And so I really do thank you all for welcoming me into this space to help facilitate tonight's conversation. To begin the conversation, I'd really like to invite the powerful Tamara Banks, who is a freelance journalist, documentary filmmaker, and media trainer focusing on social justice and dedicated to creating transformational social change through excellence in journalism. Her background and her work have been included on media platforms such as PBS, CNN, ABC News, HDNet's World Report, BBC, Jazeera America, W2 News, and Fox News. All around, journalism is definitely her cup of tea, to say the least. And so Tamara, please, we would love to hear some of your reflections and your thoughts given tonight's topic.
Nadeen, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And let me thank all of my fellow panelists. Great to see you virtually. Unfortunately, to see you in this particular topic. And it's a topic that never seems to go away. What is fascinating to me that I've heard in recent days and past couple of weeks is that I'm hearing a lot of people say, wow, racism is really picking up again. Racism in America never stopped. Let us be clear about that. Let me take a few steps back. I know we're talking about George Floyd. I'm currently based and living in Atlanta, and in February, a 25-year-old man was jogging through a suburb in a town called Brunswick, Georgia, about 4.5 miles southeast of Atlanta. And two officers, off-duty officers, police officers, white, took it upon themselves to get in the back of a pickup truck with their rifles and chase after this young man. As you all know, it ended deadly for Ahmaud Arbery. And so after the community and the state and really the nation still on its heels from that, which by the way, no one was arrested until May, keeping that in mind. All of the nation and the community was still reeling and on its heels when the incident happened a little over a week ago now with Mr. George Floyd. And again, I'm stunned that people think that racism just started recently in the past 24 hours or 2 weeks, or really since 2016. Let us be clear that lynching is continuing into the 21st century. What we do know about the case with George Floyd is that the police officers, all of them, have now been arrested and charged. And the first officer that was arrested, Chavez, his charges have gone up to from third degree murder to second degree. So in some regards, there is some progress. But I would also like to point out that this is something that my parents, my father, my grandparents have dealt with when they were young. I do not know one Black man in my life, be it my brother, my husband, my cousins, my father, my colleagues, who have not been harassed at the very least by white officers. And in some of those cases, even Black officers. So what we need to start thinking about in terms of the why in this space is knowing where the history comes from with the police departments. Typically, police departments back in the day were officers recruited out of the KKK. So when you have a mindset that hasn't ever really been changed and moved forward and updated and changed, that permeates generation after generation after generation. And what we all need to know and realize too is that the whole world is watching us. We have prided ourselves as Americans and thinking and believing, and it's true in many cases, that we are the people, the country that everybody aspires to be, the land of the free and the brave. Well, you sure as heck better be brave to go out at a certain time of night if you're African American in this country. The United Nations in the past few days, the human rights chief last Thursday condemned the killing of 46-year-old George Floyd while in police custody. So I think where we are now, to wrap up my opening statements, is we are in a moment. The protests, the rallies, the riots, the praying, the crying, the tears, the holding of hands, the pushing back is a moment where we all need this moment, particularly Black Americans need this moment. But we have to get to a point where we transition and turn this moment into a movement. So I'm anxious to be a part of that, especially as a journalist, and telling this story about how we move from this moment into a movement.
Thank you, Tamara. If I may ask one question, I really appreciated how you really framed that when you talked about the moment into the movement. How does that build on what the moment that was created back in 2016 with Ferguson and the start of Black Lives Matter and the push, and that has never ended. If anything, that has been further amplified by the killing of George Floyd. And so do you feel that's the movement that's going to be continuously amplified, or are we talking about something even much larger than that type of movement?
Well, I think that was the beginning of movement. I think you raised an interesting point about 2016. When I cover the White House or do stories on President Trump, I have the utmost respect. As an American, a Black American, I also am very much aware of how his policies and his administration see different Americans differently. And so But I want to be clear that racism in America didn't start when President Trump was elected. And so what it did was, while we had 8 years previously of a Black American and a Black family in the White House, Pennsylvania Avenue, and admired and respected throughout the world, in some sense, we were in a false sense of security. So then what happened in 2016 is that the curtain of racism and misogyny and homophobia was pulled back. And so you can't clean an infected wound, and this wound being racism and the others I just mentioned, you can't clean it out until it's exposed and gets air. And so that did start in 2016, I believe. And it started with the Black Lives Matter movement was part of that as well. And so this movement doesn't happen overnight, over a few months, or even a year. It takes, a few years of building to be able to really move the needle. And I think we're in that space now.
Certainly agreed. I really want to